News elements. Let's quickly look at news elements. Now, the essence of this is to show you how to identify news elements in a story. Now, news elements, we refer to news elements here as reporters' key questions. News elements are the facts that you use to build your story. News elements are like the pointers to a story. They are the things you use to write your story. They are the questions you ask yourself as you write your story, be it straight news report or even picture stories. But basically, we're looking at straight news report here. If you're writing your headline, your lead, the second paragraph, the third paragraph, of course, the lead is the first paragraph, then second and third paragraphs, and all that. You are looking at the elements. What are the elements of news? The news elements are the ingredients of the story. They are the facts. They are the points that make the story meaningful. They are the points, they are the facts that make the story meaningful. So, the news elements are like the parts. They are like the skeletal parts of the news story. They are the ingredients of a story. So when you're writing a straight news report, you are asking yourself questions: the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how. These are the things that you use, the answers that you use to make up a story. Now, the most important thing is, how do you identify them in a story? Let's take a look at some examples. Now look at this story. Breaking: Lagos discharges 49 former COVID-19 patients. Now, this story, we picked only 2 paragraphs to explain something to you. The Lagos state government has announced the discharge of 49 former COVID-19 patients. According to a tweet by the Federal Ministry of Health on Wednesday, discharged patients consisted of 28 female and 21 male, one of which was a Greek national. Now, let's look for the 5 W's and H. Let's see whether they'll appear in these 2 paragraphs. Remember, all the news elements must not appear in the lead. In fact, they should not, because if they appear in the lead, they will overload the lead, and it's not going to make sense. It's not going to make for smooth reading again. So all the elements should not be packed in the lead. You spread them across the story, mostly first, second paragraph. Now let's look at this. Now, Lagos state government is the who, because Lagos state government made the announcement. The who is the Lagos state government, who talks about the personality involved in the story. That is either the personality or the organization that is involved in the story, the center of the story. So the who here is Lagos state government. Now the what refers to the event that happened. You know, news is an account of an event, and the event here is that 49 former COVID-19 patients were discharged. The where is Lagos state, is the where here. The where. The when here, let's look for when in the 2 paragraphs. You find the second paragraph, you will see the when. Wednesday, that's the when. The why behind the story is, that is, why were they discharged? Why were they discharged? Because they had recovered from COVID-19. That's the why. And then the how in this story talks about how were they discharged. Now, from what we could see here, the announcement was made on Twitter. If you see here, it was a tweet by the state government. So there is the how were they discharged. Someone else could say maybe they were given letters showing that they've been discharged, or maybe it was announced in the public. So we have the who, the personality involved as Lagos state government. You have the what, that is the account you are giving, the event that occurred that you are giving account of, and that is discharge of COVID-19 patients. And we have the where, that is where the event happened, and that is Lagos state. You can see it there. And then you have the when, that is the day or date the event happened, and that is Wednesday. You have the why, and that is why were they discharged, because the event said they were discharged. Why? Because they had recovered from COVID-19. And then we have the how, and then how was the announcement made? How were they discharged? And then we have a tweet. It was via a tweet. There was a tweet. The state government, through a tweet, announced that they had recovered and that the patients were being discharged. We have another example here. Drug giant Pfizer says vaccine very close to trial phase. The pharmaceutical giant Pfizer has said that a new coronavirus vaccine could be tested as early as next week. Speaking on Tuesday, during a press conference, Pfizer chief executive Albert Bola said this was part of efforts made to fight the spread of COVID-19. The who is Pfizer, the pharmaceutical giant. They are the ones that make the announcement. The who is Pfizer. The what is the fact that coronavirus vaccine could be available as early as next week. So the what is coronavirus vaccine that will be available. That's the what. The event you are reporting is the fact that the pharmaceutical company has announced that coronavirus vaccine could be available as early as next week. Now the when talks about when the information was released, and this event took place in a press conference. The press conference took place on a Tuesday. So the when is Tuesday, not early as next week. They wrote there. No, the when talks about where the event occurred or where the announcement was made, and that is Tuesday. That's the when. The where here in the two paragraphs we can't find the where because the press conference venue was not written here. So the where could be in the third or fourth paragraph, but we have two paragraphs here. So the where talks about where the press conference took place, where the event took place, and then the why is in the second paragraph. You could find that it said, speaking on Tuesday during a press conference, Pfizer chief executive Albert Bola said this was part of the effort. The how here, you could refer to the how here as test. The way it's going to be tested next week. So in this case, you could refer to the how as the vaccine will have to be tested next week. Otherwise, somebody else could say that the how is not in the two paragraphs here, but here you can say the how. How is the vaccine going to be certified? It's going to be tested. That's the how. You can use that as the how. Now let's see another example. Now here is an example that has up to 5 paragraphs. Gunmen kidnap army captain, 3 others in Ondo. Now look at the first paragraph. Gunmen on Tuesday kidnapped 4 people along Kaba Oga Akoko Express Road in Akoko North East local government area of Ondo State. The second paragraph. One of the victims, an officer in the Nigerian army identified as Captain D, Ghana, and 3 others were said to be coming from Abuja when the incident happened. Now let's look at this. The who is not gunmen. The who here is identified as Captain D, Ghana. Now somebody else will say, yes, you could have who in 2 places because the gunmen here refer to the who. They are the ones that kidnapped the victims. And then personalities again involved in this. You have the who as Captain D, Ghana. The who gunmen here are also the people that are involved in the story. So the who, you have gunmen, they kidnapped 4 people along Kaba Alga Akoko Road. The when it took place on a Tuesday. What? Kidnap. People were kidnapped. Where? Akoko North East local government area. Where? Along Kaba Alga Akoko Expressway. Along Kaba Alga Akoko Expressway. That's the where. Why? Now if you look at the last paragraph, it was however gathered that the abductors had contacted the families of victims demanding 20 million for the release of the 4 victims. So the why here could be that the gunmen kidnapped the victims to request for 20 million. And then the how, if you look at the third paragraph, you see the how. They stopped the vehicle conveying the victims on the expressway and dragged them into the bush. That's the how. So you have the how, that is how the event took place. The hoodlums stopped their vehicle and then dragged them into the bush. And then you have the why, that is why were they kidnapped? Because the abductors, the kidnappers, wanted 20 million from them. And then you have seen the where, it happened along Akoko, along Kaba Alga Akoko Expressway in Akoko North East local government area. And then you have the what, kidnap, people were kidnapped. And then you have the when on Tuesday. Then the who is where you could see that could confuse you, but here you have the who. The gunmen were the ones that kidnapped, so they're the center of the story. So the gunmen here could serve as the who. You could also say that there is another involvement there. The who also could be Captain D, Ghana, and 3 others. They could be the ones involved because Captain D, Ghana is a personality, an army officer, so that's also the who. So the fact is that you can see that you can easily identify the elements in a story. That is the basic thing. You should be able to identify the elements in a story because the news elements are the key questions that you ask while writing a story.